I can start all over again if you want to put a recording. I just don't want to bore everybody.
No.
Carl, I already did that before you showed up.
All right, so I will quickly start all over again for the purposes of the recording. My name is Carl Richardson. I am the State House ADA coordinator, where it is my role to work with the governor's office and the legislature to make the many program services and activities at the State House accessible to people of all abilities. And that can be anything from working with legislative information services to make sure their websites are fully accessible to people, whether it be a blind person who needs screen reader technology, a person with limited dexterity in their hands, a deaf person who needs captions, to making sure that the actual events at the State House is accessible, to providing communication access, such as interpreters for the deaf and hard of hearing, assistive listening devices, captions, live captions, to working with digital capital asset management and maintenance, to making sure as we make capital improvements to the building that we keep in mind principles of universal design to make the building more friendly for everybody. And that can be as simple as putting in a bench in the middle of a hallway so people who have mobility issues can sit down and rest, but also it's also a nice place for people who don't to sit and wait for their next meeting. It benefits everybody. So those are just some of the things. Now, my role as far as being deaf and hard of hearing, I identify myself as a person who is deaf-blind in that I am a person with the dual sensory loss. I am both hard of hearing and wear hearing aids, and I'm also legally blind. I'm a guide dog user and a white cane user, and I use screen reading technology to use the computer. I was born hard of hearing, and I've worn hearing aids most of my life. As a young child, when I was about 3 or 4 years old, my mother came home crying with me one day because I couldn't tell Santa Claus what I wanted for Christmas. I was the only kid in my class that couldn't, and it bothered my mother so much that my dad said, okay, let's get called tested, and they found out that I had some speech problems and some hearing issues, and so they put me into Boston School for the Deaf, which at the time was in Randolph, Massachusetts, where I was there for 6 years. And then eventually I mainstreamed. They taught me how to speak orally because I went there in the early 70s. And that time, that school was anti-sign, oral communication only. So many of the deaf classmates that I went to school with struggled to learn how to talk. And actually at that time, if they caught us signing using our hands, they would whack our hands and make us stand in the corner of the room.
How many times did that happen to you, Carl? You don't have to answer because we're being recorded.
I love communicating and talking. My hands got whacked so many times, it's not even funny. I couldn't shut up any more with my fingers than I can with my mouth. So, yeah, it happened. I still remember Sister Mildred, and she's the only name I'll mention because I know she's no longer with us. I can still remember Sister Mildred giving my hands a couple of good whacks. But eventually I mainstreamed into public school. And from there, I kind of forgot about being part of it because with the use of hearing aids, I was able to mainstream. And then when I was a senior in high school, I found out I had what is known as Usher syndrome, which causes both the blindness and the hearing loss. It's one gene that impacts the both. And I was starting to lose my vision and go blind then. And the reason why I found out is because on my way to a keg party, I couldn't find the keg party in the dark, and everybody else could. I was in high school at the time, guys. And I couldn't find out. So that's when, and I fell off a railroad bridge, and I was all bloodied and scraped, and my father saw me coming home all bloodied and scraped, and he decided to take me to the doctor.
Oh, I see.
But I wanted to become a filmmaker. So even though I knew I was going blind and slowly becoming more hard of hearing, I went to Emerson College and got a degree in film and television. I went out to LA. I worked on a number of films and TV shows, but the last one I worked on they had me setting up the lights. And it was dark and it was confusing and I couldn't really see what I was doing. And I knocked down some of the lights and I destroyed the set. And I got fired. And I didn't know what to do. So I came back home here to Boston, the Boston area. And I kind of goofed around for a few years, not really doing much with my life. And then I remember saying to my friend, this isn't enough. I want to get back into my first love of film and television, but how do I do it? So I started researching and networking and making phone calls. And I found out about this group called the Media Access Group at WGBH, where they made film and television accessible to those who are blind, deaf, and hard of hearing. That was perfect. Combined everything that I'm part of. Film, my love of film and television, but I'm also blind and hard of hearing. I can go in there and tell them I have a degree in film. I have a history of working in film and television. So I started networking with them. And finally, a job opened up, and I said, I still remember the guy I used to work for, who is now the head of accessibility for Verizon. He said, I brought you in because you were such a pain in the ass. I wanted to see if you could do your job. Meaning I kept getting in touch with him. So I was there for a number of years, and I did marketing of closed captioning, audio description, and assistive technology. When we were downsized, I lost my job due to lack of seniority and the position that the Stay House opened up. And one of the issues they had with at the time was the lack of captioning for their webcast for the formal sessions of the House and Senate. And during the interview, I said I could fix that very easily because of my knowledge of caption, and I got the job. And the reason why I went into the world of accessibility, because while I was at GBH, I had worked on making one of the Harry Potter films audio described for the blind. And if you don't know what audio description is, it is the description of time, place, key visual elements in between gaps in dialogue. And I had worked on a project where we did that for a theatrical film where you would get a set of headphones. And by the way, even today, you can watch almost all mainstream movies in the movie theater with audio description. And I got a letter from a mom who said, I was able to take my young boy to see a movie for the first time. And I sat there smiling the whole time because I could watch my son enjoy the movie. And that letter made me say, this is the coolest job in the world. I don't care if I'm not making money. Making a difference through accommodations and accessibility is amazing. And that's how I ended up at the Stay House. Now, let me tell you about some of the things. First of all, are there any questions? Am I talking too fast? I want to take a break to see if anybody has any questions.
I have a question that I'd like to save for the end. But
Okay,
you're talking.
great.
Yeah, thanks.
So, this is Deaf and Hard of Hearing Month. At the end, I'm going to ask you guys some trivia questions to see if you guys know any of it. But what are some of the things deaf and hard of hearing folks do to be on equal footing with the rest of us who may not have hearing challenges? Well, a number of ways. Obviously, if you're born deaf, signing is one way. Culturally, they learn how to sign, and that's a different language. And they do that through American Sign Language or signed English. For instance, if you saw me signing, I don't really know ASL, but I do know sign English. Some people in the deaf community would struggle with sign English, but that's, pidgin sign. And for those of you who've been watching the governor's press conference, the governor's office has been using a CDI, which is a certified deaf interpreter, which means that we have one hearing ASL interpreter hearing what the governor is saying, then signing to the deaf interpreter who's completely deaf, and that person is on screen, and then they are re-signing it because they're bilingual in that they understand English, and then they are re-signing it more into a language commonly understood by people who are culturally deaf that don't necessarily have a good grasp of the English language. So that is by the use of CDI. So I bet you didn't know that during COVID, the majority of the interpreters that are on screen are completely deaf themselves. So that does two things. One, it employs the deaf community. And secondly, it allows them to communicate in a way that only deaf people understand, because they don't necessarily have access to print and radio and the news media the way we do during these challenging and difficult times. So that's quite amazing, actually. So that's one thing, through language. Another way that the deaf and hard of hearing is to use assistive technology is through augmented communication, which could be as simple as pen and paper. It could be a picture board. It could be, right now the Commission for the Deaf is coming up with a placard full of all symbols and everything for COVID. I know they also have worked with the Registry of Motor Vehicles to do a communication card in case they get pulled over by the police. So there's no lack of, they point to something like, I'm pulling you over because you got a speeding ticket, or can I help you? Or you point out to the officer, I'm deaf and hard of hearing, and they stick these cards behind their back visor. So that's augmented communication. Another form of technology they use would be, and this is more for hard of hearing than deaf, would be amplification device. For example, in the State House, in the 4 hearing rooms, A1, A2, B1, B2, and the 2 chambers, the House chambers and the Senate chambers in Gardner Auditorium, we make available the use of assistive listening devices, which are connected to the sound system so that a hard of hearing individual can simply request an assistive listening device and hear what is being said by, and they look like little Walkmans or little iPhones with headphones. And and in a couple of the rooms, we even have what's called induction coil loop under the rug, so that the individual doesn't even have to ask for an assistive listening device. They simply click a switch on their hearing aid called the T-coil switch, and then they can hear directly to their hearing aid. Hearing aids are another form of assistive listening devices. I'm talking to you right now wearing hearing aids, and my hearing aids are actually Bluetooth to the phone. So that's how I talk to you. I also have an array of Bluetooth microphones that I use to go directly to my hearing aids if I need to use those. So that, amplification devices. Phones also act as amplification devices. If you have, you can get them free from the Relay program in Massachusetts. Another form of assistive technology is notification devices. Many deaf and hard of hearing people have their doorbells, alarms, fire alarms hooked up to flashing lights. And in my case, because I'm deafblind and don't always see flashing lights, I have it hooked up to a pager. So if the pager vibrates, then I push a certain button, and I have multiple buttons on the pager, and if I hit a certain button, I then know which device is going off. Although since I've gotten my guide dog, he notifies me when stuff is going on, so I don't really use it that much. But that's how deaf-blind people are aware of things, through vibrating notification devices. A lot of people now are using video phones. The deaf people are using video phones and to talk to each other, but not only to talk to us. They will give us a number that actually goes to a relay center where there are interpreters on standby, and they will sign for us to the person on the other end and voice when the person signs for them. They do the same, it's the same thing. I have a deaf sister-in-law who uses a voice carryover phone, so she is oral, she's able to talk, but she's completely deaf due to a brain tumor. So she can talk, but she sees captions on the phone, so somebody is typing. Again, that's at the relay center. Although nowadays they're starting to have phones that have ASR or IT. ASR stands for automatic speech recognition, or IT phone caption phones, which are done through the voice. And these relay centers are all paid for. We all pay for them. They're free to those who need them and use them, but we all pay for them because at the end of every cell phone or landline bill is a little surcharge that says it's for the FCC, and then the FCC then pays all these people to make telecommunications accessible to the deaf and hard of hearing. And and TTYs are an old way. There's still some folks that do TTYs, but not too many people. Now with the expansion of cell phone technology and web technology, you're starting to see a lot of apps that are beneficial to people that may not necessarily identify, well, both for those who are deaf and hard of hearing, but even for people who may not identify as deaf or hard of hearing. There are amplification apps. You can stick in the middle of a dining room table. You can stick your iPhone and it'll pick up what everybody said and it would send it to a Bluetooth earpiece. There are live transcription apps. Google has an excellent one for those who use Android-based devices or Chromebook devices. If I were in a room with you, just you, I'm not talking over a Zoom call or a Microsoft Teams call, but if I were just in a room with you and I had the app open and you were talking to me, it would literally live transcribe what you were saying. And it's called Live Transcribe, and it's quite good. Much like when you go to a foreign country and you are, you say something, it automatically hears what you're saying and then transcribes it into a foreign language, just does it in the primary language. There's an app also called Live Caption, which is also an Android-based app, where you can take any podcast, any video, any pre-recorded thing and play it, and the captions will show up, and you can place the captions just by simply moving your finger around exactly where you want them to go on screen and expand them and make them smaller or bigger and Apple is also starting to come up with those sort of things. So this is actually a very exciting time for those who are deaf and hard of hearing. There's a lot of ways to do it. The most important thing to know is that folks who are deaf and hard of hearing often feel isolated, but with the use of assistive technology, they can participate in society, they can be gainfully employed, and they can produce as much as anybody else. So I will take a moment to pause for questions because I know I've said a lot, and then I want to wrap up with some fun trivia. I wish you could see me on the phone because then you could see how good looking I am. No, I'm kidding.
Well,
because I was actually going to show you some signs and teach you a couple of signs. And I was looking forward to doing that. But one sign I can visually teach you, let's say I was given a public speech and you wanted to clap. Deaf people don't clap because they can't hear. So what they do is they put both their hands up and they wiggle their wrist, and their hands kind of go back and forth as they wiggle their wrist. And that's how they applaud to the to performers when they're together as a community at an event. So I'll stop for a minute and see if anybody has any questions, and then I'll wrap up with some fun trivia I think you guys will find interesting.
Awesome. Thanks, Carl. This is Sam. I met you the other day, and while you were speaking, I shared my screen, and we all cyberstalked you. So a belated congratulations on your Employee of the Year award back in 2012. We saw that you made it on Pinterest in the United Kingdom for a tour you gave Michael Holden back in, I don't even know what the date is here, back in the day. But
I forgot about him.
Yeah, this is your life at this point. We read about you, or we saw your face anyway, when on a GBH panel I think you were on. Anyway, so we've been able to stare at your face most of this time. So, but it is good to see you animated, and so you should come back to another third stay of ours. But I do have a question. So we're all in IT, and we all have to be extremely mindful when creating products and technology solutions that have to be ADA compliant, thanks to the Commonwealth and to the federal government. So we do our best with that. But as humans, we're your colleagues. Is there anything that you can tell us as your colleagues that you wish we knew, or wish we did, or wish we did not do?
So let's try to stick to the deaf and hard of hearing perspective. So sure, I'm assuming you guys are linking to a lot of podcasts now and a lot of videos and news footage. So even if you don't have captions, you could add transcripts so that people could follow along with transcripts and that is a form of accessibility and a reasonable accommodation.
Anything a little more personal, like when we get back into the office together.
Personal.
You're okay with that?
Yeah, I don't anything personal. Yeah, I mean, I get annoyed as a blind person when I can't do certain functions on the website as a blind person, because I want to do stuff myself without necessarily asking for the help of my colleagues. So for those of you who are in IT, try to follow the World Wide Web Consortium guidelines, the W3C, WCAG's guidelines of, I think we're now doing level 2.0 AA standards, and if you can, that would be great if you follow them. And it's always easier to do them ahead of time in the planning stage than it is to retroactively go back and fix things. So that because we're all doing things now over smartphones, internet, and even more so now that we're working from home. So and we're not, I don't get a discount if I can't, for instance, access a streaming service. I still have to pay the same amount. Or if I don't get a reduction in my taxes if I can't access a service that you're trying to provide on mass.gov.
Good point. Great. Does anyone else have any questions for Carl?
Well, I have some fun trivia if you guys want to hear some fun trivia.
We do.
So, first of all, who do you think was the first commissioner for the Massachusetts Commission for the Blind? And for those of you who were on the call the other day, you can't answer. A very prominent, famous person in history. People are Googling like crazy right now.
If you want to answer, come off mute or type it in the chat if you have an answer. Or guess. Yeah, it's guesses. Anyone?
Helen Keller. Helen Keller, who went to school here in Massachusetts at the Perkins School for the Blind as a child, but she later on became an advocate for the deaf and hard of hearing in the blind community, and she was actually our very first commissioner for the Massachusetts Commission for the Blind back in 1905 or 06. Around there.
Very cool.
There's a statue of someone on the State House lawn who the oldest deaf K through 12 public school is named after. And it's the oldest school in the deaf public school in the country. Anybody want to guess who that is?
Huh.
Is it Horace Mann?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was actually a proponent of deaf education, although he believed in what was then called oralism, in that where they tried to teach deaf people to speak. But the Horace Mann for the school in Alston, Massachusetts, only a few miles from Boston, or is part of Boston, is actually the oldest public school in the country for the deaf. When it originally opened, it was called the Boston School for the Deaf and Mute. But that's just, now there was there's a area or a region in Massachusetts where at one point in time in the 1800s, as many as 1 in 4 residents of that area were deaf, to the point where everybody in that area could sign with each other, even hearing folks. Anybody have an idea where that was?
Can you give
If
us
I were
a
a teacher,
clue?
you'd all be getting asked. Well,
Give us a clue.
it's near the water.
Is it Hull?
No, Martha's Vineyard.
Oh, nice.
Martha's Vineyard, as early as 1812, 25% of the residents were deaf, and they had such a culture on that island. Hold on a second. They had such a culture on that island that everybody in that community could sign.
That's amazing.
I know.
Yes. And if you Google Martha's Vineyard in the deaf community, a lot of stuff will come up about that. There is a very famous inventor in our history that was also a teacher of deaf in the Boston area. Any ideas who that person is and what he invented? And it's kind of ironic if you think about his invention.
Alexander Graham Bell.
Yeah,
Nice.
he was a teacher of the deaf, and you heard me mention that I went to Boston School for the Deaf. He actually taught for Boston School for the Deaf, although he is a controversial figure in deaf history and culture because he believed that, one, he believed in oral communication and vibration of speech. He thought by deaf people feeling the speech, they could feel what was being said. But the other thing is he believed in what today would be considered a form of eugenics. He felt deaf people should not mate so that they would not increase the numbers of deaf people.
Oh, wow.
So, but it's ironic that a person who taught the deaf and had a deaf mother also invented a telephone so that people could communicate listening to each other over the phone. I've just always found that fascinating.
It is.
And then I just have a couple, I'm not going to ask you because these are so obscure. I just have a couple of quick, fun tidbits. We all know Abraham Lincoln for, getting rid of slavery and winning the Civil War, but he also, during his tenure as president, signed a bill that created Gallaudet University, which still to this day is the only liberal arts college for the deaf. Let's see what else. Baseball. They were the center fielder named Dummy Hoy, and the reason why his name was Dummy is because in those days, if you were deaf and you could not speak, you were called dumb. And so his nickname was Dummy Hoy. His real name was William, but he was a professional baseball player and a very good one that played for a couple decades. And because he was on all these baseball teams, they needed a way to communicate and let him know what to play for. So that's how the umpires came up with many of the hand gestures that we see today, such as you're out, calling balls and strikes, you're safe, that sort of thing. And that was the result of Dummy Hoy being on that, being a deaf baseball player more than 100 years ago now. And I don't know if this one's true. I haven't been able to confirm it, but I even hear that the football huddle is a result of deaf people playing football against each other. A gentleman who was supposedly on the Gallaudet Bison back in the 1890s was signing to his deaf teammates, but the teams they were playing were also deaf, so they all knew the calls ahead of time, so they came up with the football huddle so that people could not steal their signs and steal their plays. And I don't know if that's true, but that's the baseball part, I'm fairly certain is true. So those are just some fun, neat tidbits about deaf culture and history. The thing to, if I leave anything upon you, is that, we just want to be a part of society and participate fully, just like anybody else. And I'm sorry if this changed. I felt like this changed the tenure. Me being on the phone changed the tenure a little bit because I did want to kind of see you guys on video and show you some signs. But I hope you still got something out of the presentation.
Oh, absolutely.
You're wonderful. And in fact, I think, Joanne's giving the applause. If you would not mind, and everyone else who wouldn't mind turning on your video, I can take a screenshot of everyone who's video able who wants to do beyond, and we'll all give him an applause symbol. Joanne, you left.
Sorry.
Oh, anyone else?
My neighbor walked up. Woo!
All right. Thanks, Neil. Okay. Oh, almost, Neil. We almost see you. All right. I got some of us anyway.
Nice.
Oh, there he is. Hold on. We'll do it again.
Okay.
All right, Carl, this is for you. Yay!
Yay. That was terrific.
Well, I also want to make sure that you guys know if you have any accessibility or questions about as it pertains to anybody in the disability community, I'm happy to act as a resource from you guys. Just Google Bureau State House, and you should be able to find my contact information, and I'm happy to talk to you guys or do whatever you guys need.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
So much, Carl.
This was fabulous. Thank you.
So I took more than my 10 minutes.
You're perfect.
Quite
Okay.
all right. You were very
Yeah.
interesting.
Absolutely. We learned a lot.
Yep.
So we're gonna when we pivot to any cleaning tips, Carl, do you have any cleaning tips you can share with us for spring cleaning?
So, my wife would tell you I don't, but but how I have to do it, because otherwise I'm going to be cleaning over and over again. So like if I'm cleaning my kitchen floor, I have to do it in a grid. I have to picture it as a grid and then say, okay, I'm going to do this grid first and that grid instead of just trying to mop because I can't see what I'm mopping. So I do everything when I work in a grid pattern, or I just pay somebody to do it. And I did that even when I could see. That's not a deaf blindness thing. I just hate to clean.
I like that.
I remember when we first got married, my wife and I had already had a cleaner. I was a bachelor for a long time before I met her, and I had already had a cleaner. And she said, "We don't need a cleaner." And I said, "Yes, we do, because you're going to get mad at me if I don't clean." So I hire somebody just to keep my part of the bargain. But
Nice.
no, I don't really have any cleaning tips other than, just put what everybody else does. Just stay neat and organized, I guess. I don't know.
Thanks.
Yep.
I like
So,
your motto.
well,
I hire someone too.
Yeah.
I'm not good at it.
Well, I hope-
Stay in your lane. Do what you're good at, right?
Yeah. I hope everybody
Some
is
people
well
love
and
to
safe.
clean, right? Thank you, Carl. If you want to stay on
All
and
right.
listen, you're more than welcome, but thank you so much. This was perfect for honoring Deaf History Month and bringing it relevant to today's world. So we appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I by no means want to be a full representative of those who are deaf and hard of hearing, because everybody has their own unique challenges and situations. But I hope I could share some perspective.
You definitely did.
Yes.
Uh,
Greatly
thank-
appreciate
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
As exciting as I find the topic of cleaning, I think I'm gonna pass. But I'm happy to be on other calls in the future when I get my technology fixed, and they're willing to teach you some signs from time to time if you think that would be fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
You
You
too.
too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording just so that we can post your stuff.